Hello, hello, hello. Journalist and historian Nathaniel Flakin joins Megan and Konrad for a dive into Berlin's disjointed revolutionary history, a trip round Red Neukölln, and finally, a detour into the left's current disjointed politics to ask, what has Die Linke ever done for us? Happy New Year, comrade.
Hello everyone. It is finally time for another episode of Megan's Megacan. I'm Megan, I'm here with Ex-Berliner magazine, and Konrad Werner. Hi Konrad.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And we also have a guest today. We have Nathaniel Flakin. Hello.
Hello, Konrad. Hello, Megan.
Hello.
Hello.
Nathaniel is a tour guide, which we're going to talk quite a lot about. Also a historian, a writer of 2 books, translator of 1. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Amazing. And also a journalist with Ex-Berliner. And we're very happy to have you here. How's your 2023 going so far?
I don't know.
Don't worry. I'm going to give you some alcohol. It'll help.
I was expecting lots of historical questions, politics. I don't know.
How are you?
23. I've got a kid at home. I'm really tired all the time.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, 7-month-old baby.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I guess that's pretty much been my entire 2023.
Right.
I don't leave the house most days.
Okay.
Or maybe go once around the block with a kid and a little.
I feel like I'm
carrier.
doing the same, but I don't have the excuse of a 7-month-old, so I'm just hibernating. Konrad, how's your 2023?
It's okay, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
You know, busy. Not got sick yet.
Oh, I
That's good.
did.
Oh, did you? I was sick over the Christmas
Oh, that
holiday.
sucks. I
Had a lingering cold, but
Yeah, I was really struck down, having spent all of December looking at people going, sickness is for the weak. What is wrong with you people? And I couldn't get out of bed for about the first week in January. Anyway, alcohol. Nathaniel, what is your experience with mega cans?
I remember back when I was a teenager, definitely those were just coming on. There was a huge
They definitely
moral
have
panic.
great ones. A moral panic about mega cans?
Because
Yes!
of, teenagers. They're so attractive. Teenagers are going to be attracted to the shiny colors and the sweet taste, and they're going to get way too drunk. And I
Because
remember,
teenagers have never been getting drunk before, ever. I'm going to hand you one.
I don't know if have I ever had one?
Oh my God.
Maybe not.
Wow. There you go.
I think I was way too cool as a teenager. I think I was drinking big steins of beer and stuff, and I'm not going to have one of those teeny cans.
I mean,
Alco Pops, isn't that what they call them?
Well, yes. This is the only part of the podcast that I get to be an expert, so I like to milk it. A megacan is thus called because it is in Germany, and this is one of the reasons many of us choose to actually live here. They're 10%, as opposed to usually around 5 to 6% in other places, sometimes even lower. So an Alco Pop, I would say, would be on your lower end, but a megacan is your 10%. But they are similar in that they are sickly sweet and essentially not what mature professionals in their mid to late 30s should be drinking, like myself. But who cares?
What else do they have besides whiskey? This one here has Tennessee whiskey in it. What
Yes.
kind of other drinks do they?
This one's got cola because I couldn't really make a decision. This is like what we would call like the OG mega can, and I've already had so much caffeine today that I thought I might as well just have some more. But they have loads of other ones. Everything you can imagine. The gin and tonic ones are actually genuinely delicious. But anyway, let's start with this one and see how we got on.
Okay.
Cheers.
it's very exciting. Cheers.
Oh, this is my first mega can of the year.
Yeah, mine too.
Cheers, everyone. Ooh.
There you go.
That's quite intense, that one.
This does remind me of being a teenager.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember in Germany, I was, 15? I was an exchange student when I showed up here. Alcohol was everywhere all of a sudden. And I remember, stealing Jack Daniels from the supermarket. Nobody seemed to care. And it was awful back then. And I'm still not a fan of the taste of whiskey. Yeah.
JD, well...
But I guess I felt cool back then for being able to do it.
And you grew up in the States, but have been either living in Germany or coming to Germany as a 15-year-old exchange student. That's very brave.
It was a chance, and it was before you had the internet, really. I mean, you had a little bit of the internet. I remember you had to go to, take a bus into the city to go on the internet once a week, and so you couldn't immediately talk to all your friends back home, every second of the day. Yeah.
And you've now been here for 20 years?
20 plus years. I was trying to work it out. I think it must have been more than half my life now.
And you studied here in Berlin?
Yes, I went to the Free University university. Whenever people say why you came to Germany, I always say free college. Got 2 degrees at the Free University.
What were they in?
A master's and a bachelor's degree in history.
Okay. And history has been your passion ever since, would you say?
Yeah,
that?
I almost didn't study it. It was kind of a last-minute decision, and I really liked it anyway. I love reading history books and figuring out how we got here.
And writing history books as well. I'm holding a lovely copy of Revolutionary Berlin, which came out last year.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, middle of last year.
What is it about?
So I work as a historical tour guide. I started a long time ago, like 13 years ago in 2009. I started giving walking tours through Kreuzberg every year. It's not like it used to be, but you did have these big protests every year on May 1st in Kreuzberg, and they would often end in riots in the evening. Even by the time I started joining it, it was already quite a tradition. It goes back all the way to 1987. And it's weird when you think about it. When you tell people from other cities, like, oh yeah, we're going to have a riot next year. Yeah, it's about 9 months away. People are already planning for it. Yeah, Germans just aren't big into spontaneity. Yeah, so I'd show people around. I would be like, oh, hey, that's where the first demonstration started, and here's where they burned down that supermarket. And and it just kind of went from there. I don't know. People recommended it to other people, and soon I started announcing it publicly. And since then I've developed about 12 historical walking tours through different parts of the city, looking at different parts of history. And if I picture myself like if I was sitting down in a room and giving a lecture about something that happened, I don't know, nobody wants to go to that. Like, I don't even want to go to that, and I'm a historian. But you put it outside and you go around and you say, like, not just something happened, but something happened right where we're standing, right here. Look at that window. That's where the thing happened that people were talking about. I don't know. That's somehow really moving.
Yeah.
I went on one of your tours. I went on the November Revolution tour, 1918. It was very good. Excellent. Heartily recommend it.
Okay, yes.
All about like what happened in 1918 with the communists nearly took over.
I was doing a little bit of research because I realised that I always get into these episodes and I'm like, I vaguely know who like Rosa Luxemburg is, but if anyone actually presses me, yes, sort of ish. I also did study this, I think, when I was 15 in history, but again, it wasn't.
I mean, to be fair, it's quite a hidden episode of German history. You go, for example, the German Historical Museum totally missed out on the 100th anniversary of the revolution in Germany. They did have a exhibition about the 100th anniversary of the Constitution, as if it had just kind of fallen from the sky, as if people were just sitting around like, okay, Kaiser decided, I have a constitution, whatever, I give up. It's not uncommon for people to know nothing about it. Yeah. Like at my tours, I even ask, if you're not from Germany, you might be assuming all the German people here are going to know this story, but actually they probably don't either.
Yeah.
And it ended around the corner from me, right here. It ended where the old SPD headquarters was, which is now a building that's now been knocked down. Yeah, it was good, and people were getting executed around here. It ends with the sailors being executed.
Yeah, it's one of the most important revolutionary processes in world history, really. Hundreds of thousands of people out on the street fighting for a different system, and terrible massacres. Some historians even refer to it as a German Civil War, and it's just amazing that nobody's ever heard of it. That it's not even really actively suppressed. It's just nobody even thinks about it.
In the Kreuzberg Finanzamt, that's where there was like people were like revolutionaries were being executed.
There is a sign there, but it's inside the main entrance. Like only during opening hours you can go inside, and they put up a plaque. And I just read about this recently, that the Social Democrats here in Kreuzberg successfully prevented a mention of the role of the Social Democratic Party in commanding, in ordering those executions.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So there is a plaque, but it doesn't actually say who was in charge when all those people were being shot.
And what is your favourite tour?
Yes, I wanted to ask that. You've got like 12. What's your favourite?
Well, Megan, you live in Neukölln as well, right?
I do. Like all the cool people.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I do a tour about Neukölln as well. That's where I've lived for most of my time here in Berlin. Neukölln used to be a separate city. I didn't know that when I moved there, but Neukölln, used to be a workers' city outside the gates of Berlin, only integrated into Berlin in 1920. And there was a ton of communist history in Neukölln, both as part of Berlin and before, when it was a separate city. There were big fights against Nazis when they were trying to get a toehold in the neighborhood in the late 1920s. And so I do a tour around there, and just these places I pass every single day, and to think, wow, this is where those underground communist agents shot that Nazi barkeep. And these big events of world history, like going around right around the corner. Or like the head of the Communist Party after Rosa Luxemburg was murdered was a guy named Leo Jochiches, her lifelong political partner. And he also lived in Neukölln. He lived right at Sonnenallee in a building that's still standing. And you can read about that and, the way resistance was organized against the First World War. Jochiches would go around the corner from his apartment, go to a bar to use the telephone and, have secret calls to revolutionaries in different parts of Germany. And yeah, I don't know, that was... You can get a coffee right now at that shop. That's not that far. It was 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, but it's not that far away from us.
Berlin is very, very good for, I mean, obviously this is like stating the obvious, but like for history. There's just so much of it.
I say in the introduction to my book, I say, what's so interesting about Berlin history is just how non-contiguous it is. As an example, if you think about Buckingham Palace in London, I mean, you can write a lot about Buckingham Palace, but it's kind of one single history going forward.
Yeah, Whereas, I haven't really thought about this.
If you take the equivalent in Berlin, you've got the City Palace that was built, I don't remember, in the 13th century or something. It was the site of the war beginning, the First World War beginning. It was the site of the revolution that took place 4 years later. Then it got bombarded by counter-revolutionary paramilitaries. Then it was turned into a museum. Then it was bombed during the Second World War. Then in East Germany, they blew up all the ruins and they turned it into a park. And the World Festival of Students and Youth took place on that empty lot. And Angela Davis was there. And then they built the new East German Parliament building there, the Palace of the Republic, which was really cool, which they then tore down. And now they've rebuilt the palace and they filled it with the Ethnological Museum full of colonial art.
Livid.
Yeah. But it's like
amazing.
6, 8, 10 different phases for this one building, and it's not the same history at all. I think I counted like 6 different political regimes in Berlin just in the 20th century.
Yeah, geez.
It's just a lot of history to cover. Yeah,
take that, Buckingham Palace.
And one thing that I thought you did that was pretty cool is you had 2 Stolpersteine installed, or you applied to have them installed. Can you explain quickly what is a Stolperstein?
So a Stolperstein, maybe you've seen them too. All around the city, they have these brass cobblestones, and they'll always list one name. Each one is dedicated to one person, and it'll say, this person lived here. And the idea is that people who were persecuted, who were forced to flee, who were murdered during the rule of National Socialism, they get these commemorative markers. And the idea is, instead of just remembering, the really famous people who fell victim to the Nazis, these are also to commemorate very normal people. So sometimes you'll be walking down and you'll see 6 different Stolperstein at the same location. This just represents different people who lived in this building and all, suffered under the fascists. And so, there's a single artist. I want to say his name is Günther Demning, but I should probably check that. There's a single artist who's been doing Stolpersteine. It started out as his project. He's been doing them all over Europe, tens of thousands of Stolpersteine, and he still does most of them personally. In each district in Berlin, there's an initiative that coordinates all these Stolpersteine, and anybody can write to them and pay a small fee. I think it was 180 euros for each Stolperstein. And then they'll organize an appointment, and then every couple of months this artist comes to each Berlin district and will install the Stolpersteine there. And so I got 2. I got near where I live in Neukölln, 2 for left-wing activists who had to flee Berlin under the Nazis. The first one was a metal worker and a leader of the Trotskyist organization in Berlin. His name was Anton Grulewitz. He and his wife were forced to flee in 1933. Their apartment got trashed by Nazi stormtroopers. They did come back to Berlin. They did survive Nazism. They returned in 1955. But the Stolpersteine are not limited to people who died.
Right.
And then the other one was actually for a fascinating personality. So in 1924, the Communist Party of Germany, first party probably in world history to have a woman leader, as Rosa Luxemburg. 1924, Rosa Luxemburg had been dead for a while. Communist Party got also the second party in world history to have a woman leader. They elected a 28-year-old Viennese woman named Ruth Fischer to be chairwoman. Fascinating personality. She's mostly remembered. She kind of was all over the map politically. She ended up being a very fanatical anti-communist. She ended up denouncing her own brother as a Soviet agent in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. So nobody really likes her anymore because, all the communists hate her for having been an anti-communist, but all the anti-communists never really trusted her because she was such an important communist leader before.
Okay.
But anyway, she lived in Neukölln as well. And
really?
her grandson, is still around. He's an artist in England.
How come you were the one who sort of not discovered these people, but how were you coming? You were the one who suggested they should get a Stolperstein.
Yeah, I don't remember. But yeah, anybody could do it. You guys could do it too. You just come up with somebody's history. Yeah, I mean, these are two people, like, it was well enough known, and you have to see if you can find if there's any surviving descendants. They don't need to be the ones to take the initiative, but they do need to kind of be in agreement with it being done.
But why did you think when you've read about them, why did you think they have to be honoured? Or they should be remembered in this way?
I mean, Anton Grülewitz, I read about him a lot. He was the guy who published all of Trotsky's writings in the late 1920s, early 1930s in Berlin. Every time you get a historical... Sorry, I'm belching.
That's just
I guess that's the format, right?
Yeah.
That's part of it.
That's part of it. Yeah, Anton Grülewitz, every time you buy an original pamphlet by Leon Trotsky about how to fight against fascism in Germany, it always says, published by Anton Grülewitz, Brusendorfer Straße, number 23. And I don't know, I checked that out one time and I was like, somebody should have some kind of marker here. And Stolpersteiner, it's really hard to get a marker put on a house because you need to talk to the district government and you need to talk to the owner of the house. And I've never figured out how to do that. But like to get a Stolperstein, that's really easy.
You just have to talk to this artist.
Yeah, he's got like a blanket agreement for all the sidewalks in Berlin.
That's cool. And again, it's sort of like you were saying all of this different history, and I think it's Stolpern is to like stumble in German, isn't it? So it's this kind of, or to...
A stumbling stone.
Yes, stumbling block. Yeah.
That's the idea with the art project, is that, it's not really in your face. It's something you kind of trip over and like, hey, what's here? And then, I guess there's this unbelievable history of genocide and mass persecution, right in this building.
Exactly, and it affects people that either in our own buildings, perhaps if you have them, or like next door, or like, and apartments that we're still, because a lot of us still live in Altbau apartments, which were there for all of the 20th century. So they're actually in the rooms that we were.
Yeah, I'm working on a new tour down in Dahlem, where the Free University, where my alma mater is. There you have the OSI, the Political Science Institute, and what I've been reading about is how the building of the OSI was the Kaiser Wilhelm Research Society before there was a university down there, and how they were connected to Nazi medical experiments. So Josef Mengele would be murdering people and collecting tissue from them, and they would get sent to Berlin and be stored in a basement there. And you can just be sitting there and taking a class on, modern political theory, and like, wow, we're right in the room where they were storing the victims of the Nazis, where they were storing their body parts.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. As part of Berlin history, there's all kinds of disturbing things that happen in the places where we work and study and take the train.
And the other story I wanted to get you to tell was after you studied, you became a journalist. And you worked for a former Stasi spy. Is that true?
Yeah, I always feel weird about East Germany because on the one hand, I'm a critical communist, and people like me did tend to get thrown in jail in East Germany. Like I mentioned some writings by Leon Trotsky. I'm kind of a fan. You could get arrested for being in possession of writings by Leon Trotsky in East Germany. People were spied on and literally thrown in prison. So like, I'm not a huge fan. I wouldn't have thrived in that system. And at the same time, there's just such an enormous industry of talking about how terrible East Germany was that I feel like some of the positive things get ignored, So for example, West Germany in the 1980s, there was this huge mass movement against apartheid in South Africa and Namibia as well. The West German government was all about supporting the apartheid regime, giving them political support. Also, they were trying to build a nuclear reactor. They were trying to give nuclear arms to the apartheid government. And East Germany, in contrast, was providing weapons and military training and food and supplies to anti-apartheid movements like the SWAPO and what became Namibia and Southwest Africa. So if we want to have a complete picture of the Stasi, who did a lot of terrible things and imprisoned a lot of people, they also were supporting the struggle to topple the apartheid regime.
But tell us about your boss.
Oh, right. So
Peter Walter.
We don't want nuance, like the historical nuance. What we want are stories.
So I was working at a daily paper here in Berlin called Junge Welt, which is an independent left-wing daily paper. And my boss, the first boss I ever had as a journalist, was a guy named Peter Walter. He had a very long career. He was quite old already when I met him, and he had a long career working at Reuters. He had been the the bureau chief of Reuters in London, I think for a long time too, for many years. And it was only after the wall came down, after German reunification, where they were trying to decode all these Stasi files, that they realized, holy shit, this guy's been working for the Stasi since 1975, I think.
Wow.
And so I got to talk to him about that, how he joined the Stasi. And he said he was just a teenager. He had been interested in socialist politics. And if I remember correctly, somebody in kind of an ugly suit approached him at a cafe and said, hey, would you like to do something serious to try to prevent war? And he said that was his main motivation. He wanted to prevent a nuclear war from destroying all of humanity. And he thought by informing people in the East about what was going on in the West, he could defuse tensions. If they were suspecting, are they planning an immediate nuclear strike against us? He could provide behind the scenes information about what was going on. And so I think even before he turned 18, he reinvented himself. He became a right-wing social democrat. He joined the SPD. And that was his public profile for decades.
So he was living in London and then in West Germany?
I don't remember that part of his biography. He definitely grew up in West Germany. And then he, as part of his job, at some point he went to London, but I don't remember when that was. Yeah, he worked in West Germany and in England.
And then he went to prison for about a year, you said?
Yeah, not for a super long time, but yeah, he was in prison for a while, and then he came out and he could finally, in quite an advanced age, then be what he'd always been at heart. He could be a communist, and he was a communist journalist.
And working for the Junge Welt.
Junge Welt, right.
It still exists, right?
Junge Welt was an East German paper. It was founded around the same time East Germany was founded. It was the official daily of the East German Youth Organization, the Free German Youth. It was the biggest newspaper in East Germany. It was a bit more critical than the most official organ, and people really liked it. I think it sold over 1 million copies a day in East Germany. After reunification, a group of journalists took it over and they turned it into a cooperative. So the people working there kind of own it, which is the same model like the Taz has, and now ND, Neues Deutschland, they have that model as well. Yeah,
the Taz is like the sort of mainstream left-wing paper in Germany, daily, you can get in everywhere. And Neues Deutschland, wasn't that originally the main party paper?
Exactly, that was the main party paper of the Socialist Unity Party. Yeah. That became then the party of the PDS, and then the newspaper Die Linke. And Die Linke wanted to get rid of it because it loses a ton of money, and then they just recently turned it into a cooperative, and anybody can buy shares in it. And the idea is now that the people working there are kind of all collective owners of the newspaper they put out.
And you still work as a journalist, right?
Yeah, I write an online column for Ex-Berliner every week, and I sometimes write for ND and a few other publications.
So you are a communist.
Yeah.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Easy, McCarthy.
When I was entering the United States, where I'm from, you have to fill that out as well. And I was wondering, because they ask you that, member the Communist Party? It's well, which Communist Party? You guys got to be more specific. Do you mean party in the world historical sense, the way Karl Marx used the word? Then I guess so. Are you referring to a legal entity? I don't think I've ever been a member of an organization like Communist Party in the name.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely I'm a communist. I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense that a tiny number of people controls all of society's wealth, that everybody is working to produce wealth, and then what happens with that wealth, how it gets made and distributed, is in the hands of a minuscule group of people, most of whom are just descendants of other capitalists who previously controlled society's wealth. I don't see how that's a good way to organize society. If you imagine, I don't know, a car company like BMW, there's over 100,000 people working there. Why should 2 people be in charge of all that? And their main qualification is they happen to be the grandkids of Nazi war criminals who are really effective at exploiting slave labor under Hitler. Why does that give them some particular insight that, say, somebody working on a conveyor belt on a... Now I understand the point of the podcast. I can't think of the thing where the car parts go by.
Assembly line.
Production line, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's kind of the podcast is kind of a test to see how much
how well you can talk.
Often we have to structure stories because otherwise Konrad has to explain things like the electoral overhang to me, one mega canning, which is just us both looking at each other going, What?
Well, so that's what communism is for me anyway. That that everybody should control everything together. Same thing in the housing market. Instead of having a few corporations controlling hundreds of thousands of apartments in Berlin, shouldn't the people living in the apartments kind of collectively decide what happens with them and how much rent people should pay and what repairs get done?
So you are from the southern states of America. You're from specifically Texas.
Yes.
How often do you go back there, and
what's that like?
What's that like?
Yeah, it is a weird place because Austin, especially the last couple of years, you can now walk around with a assault rifle. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but the last time I was visiting my family there, you did have a bunch of people walking by with assault rifles. Like, oh,
what?
Yeah, it's a democratic right now. Anybody can do it, and there's always these reports of people who walk into the public part of an airport with a loaded assault rifle, waving it around. Hey, I got an assault rifle here, and somebody calls the police, and the police are like, nothing wrong here. This is legal. This is how we all live now.
But what do you tell your school friends and your family? You're just like a communist living in Berlin. Are you like the black sheep of the family?
No. I think things have changed a lot in the United States. So I first became interested in communism when I was living in San Antonio, Texas, and that did feel a bit unusual. What was that? That was the 90s. I think things have changed a lot. Now among people under 35 in the United States, socialism is more popular than capitalism. And maybe people don't understand the same thing with socialism that I would. Maybe just a more regulated form of capitalism with a better safety net is enough to be considered socialism in the United States. But it's not like a taboo word. It's not something that scares people off, really. And then also think about political discourse in the United States. You have the right calling everybody communists. Kamala Harris is a communist. She's definitely not a communist. Joe Biden is a communist. Also definitely not a communist. But anyone who's to the left of Attila the Hun is a communist now. So you say, I'm a communist. Well, yeah, I guess everybody's a communist now. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's lost a lot of its scare potential now.
Okay.
I mean, and if you have the right saying everything that makes life a little bit less bad for normal working people, if we introduced, publicly funded daycare, that's communism. I think that's done a lot to really demonize the word. That all these good things are constantly being called communism. Communism means free daycare and free college.
Yes.
Actually sounds pretty good. Yeah.
That's interesting. The more they kind of use it as this bogeyman, the worse it's interesting. So moving to present day, you do this because you actually...
Okay. So we every now and then we ask our listeners to ask us a question.
We do.
And so far no one has asked it. So it's a bit like with in school, probably you know this from school, then when you say anyone got something to say and no one wants to put their hand up.
Someone does, and they always want to go to the toilet.
Anyway, one of our listeners called Neve did ask me a question.
Yes.
And the question was, she feels she is left-wing, but who should she vote for in Germany? Because she is ambivalent about Die Linke, which is the sort of mainstream left-wing party.
We've all
kind of avoided this question. And I thought that with Nathaniel here as a guest, it would be a perfect opportunity to ask, should you vote for Die Linke?
Okay.
Nathaniel.
Let me open by saying something about the Green Party, because they might win the upcoming elections. Who should we vote
for then? We've got elections coming up again. We're doing them again in February, the Berlin ones. So if you're on the left?
And so right now in West Germany, the town of Lützerath is being destroyed. They're going to bring in the largest machine that humanity has ever built, literally the biggest machine bar none, to suck the ground out from under the town of Lützerath. And the idea is in the next couple of years, they want to dig up 280 million tons of lignite coal and burn it. It reminds me kind of the villains from that 1990s cartoon show Captain Planet, the ones who are like, I want to destroy the environment as quickly as possible, blah, ha, ha, ha. It's hard to imagine anything more evil than the energy company RWE is doing right now. And there's people...
I don't understand how this is real.
Yeah. And I wanted
What the
to
fuck?
bring that up because it's the Green Party that's responsible for doing this. It's a green energy minister at the federal level. It's a green energy minister at the level of North Rhine-Westphalia, the state where it's taking place. Also a green police chief of the city of Aachen that's organizing the repression to try to clear out activists so that this town can be destroyed. That's the Green Party right now. The Green Party started out, and I mean, that's something I'm interested in as a historian as well, started out about 40 years ago, almost exactly 40 years ago, as a party of pacifists and environmentalists. A lot of people who lived in squatted houses in West Berlin formed the Green Party. And the Green Party has gone on to be, I think, the most militaristic, the most aggressive party of German imperialism at all. In the last year, you've seen several times where the most right-wing party, the most traditionally right-wing party, the Christian Social Union from Bavaria, where they've been telling the Greens to pump the brakes a bit with all this militarism. You can't solve every problem just with more German weapons, Green Party. A little bit of diplomacy might be necessary too. And so that's why I think leftists, I mean, I hear people saying, well, the Green Party, maybe we'll get some new bike paths. And I'm a big fan of bike paths.
I mean, everyone loves a bike path.
But I don't think it's a good compromise.
Okay.
And so
not green.
Not green. Obviously not the Social Democrats, the ones who, murdered all those revolutionaries in 1918. So you've got Die Linke, and Die Linke has a lot of posters that I like. I was just walking here on the way, and they said they want to respect the referendum on expropriating big landlords.
Woohoo!
Yeah, 59.1% of eligible voters in Berlin said yes, said yeah to expropriating big landlords. A government came into office which is not doing that. They tried a bunch of bureaucratic maneuvers. We're going to have a commission study the questions. What's the point of having a referendum? Like, we already studied the question. We all studied the question. We already made a decision, but they're just trying to take the wind out of the sails. And Die Linke was part of that government. They agreed in their coalition contract with the Social Democrats and with the Greens to go along with this farce of not implementing the referendum and instead trying to effectively prevent it. And Die Linke is a party, it grew out of the old East German party, the SED, and then the PDS. The PDS and Die Linke have been in government in Berlin for most of the 20 years I've been here. There was one period where they weren't in government, but besides that, they've mostly been a party in power.
But they've never led the government. They've always been the smaller part of the
junior partner, right?
Yeah.
And they would probably argue that while we're in power, the alternative is just to be in opposition, and they would rather have some influence over what is going on. Like obviously they have to make compromises because that's the nature of a coalition, the nature of democracy.
And they can prevent the worst. That's what they always say. If it wasn't for us, the SPD would just form a coalition with the conservatives.
Exactly.
And there would be even worse policies. I remember I talked to one of the leaders of Die Linke. It was a huge meeting, and I got to ask a question. Of Gregor Gysi, one of the most charismatic leaders of Die Linke. And I was asking about, in the 2000s, Die Linke, or the PDS at the time, was responsible for the privatization of hundreds of thousands of apartments in Berlin, which directly led to the explosion in rents and the housing crisis we're experiencing right now. And I asked Gregor Gysi why they did that. And Gregor Gysi said, well, if the CDU had been in power, it would have been worse. And I said, not really. I mean, Die Linke, the PDS at the time, they privatized about as much as you could have. The CDU objectively couldn't have done too much worse. There wasn't much left to privatize. And I think that politics doesn't just depend on a parliament either. You have parliamentary majorities that vote on things, that make decisions, but there's also politics that happens out on the street. There's also demonstrations and strikes and organizing that takes place outside of the parliament. And for that, it's really important who is in power and who is in the opposition. For me, the best example is, if we look at the post-war history of Germany, if we look at West Germany, what was the worst, the number one worst government for working people? And that was, I think it's hands down, the Schröder government, the SPD Green Coalition government, the Red-Green government, came to power in 1998. They passed the Hartz IV reforms, the biggest attack on social welfare in the history of West Germany. They carried out the first German war of aggression since since 1945, and a couple other terrible things I don't remember entirely. And the reason they were so bad is because, of course, like the predecessor conservative government of Helmut Kohl, of course they would have loved to attack social welfare. But if they had proposed a law like that, the trade unions would have come out onto the streets, there would have been huge protests, it would have been impossible.
Yeah.
But because it was the SPD, because it was the friends of the workers who were passing these laws, then it was actually possible. And I think the same thing is true with Die Linke. I think if Die Linke, with its, I think they have 8,000 members in Berlin, I think if they were playing the role of an active opposition, I think if they were taking these privatization policies, which at the moment they're implementing, and instead they were mobilizing people against them, I think we'd have a totally different relation of forces. And I think the same thing is true, for example, evictions. Berlin has more evictions per capita than any other German state. Berlin has a very high rate of deportations as well. And if Die Linke, instead of carrying out these policies, which theoretically they're opposed to, I think if they were organizing resistance against them, I think we'd actually see less of the things that Die Linke... I think like if they were opposing those on the streets, instead of, they say, opposing them inside the cabinet, I think we would actually have better political outcomes.
Let me offer a counterpoint. So I sometimes vote Linke, especially at federal level, because I feel, and maybe this sounds selfish, but as a journalist, I often notice that whenever someone asks a critical question in Parliament, and they have this system called the kleine Anfrage, which is like you ask a small, it's like a freedom of information thing, like, so they can get to ask critical questions. And whenever an interesting critical question comes, it is always from a Linke MP, and the Linke MPs that I've had anything to do with have always been the ones who have had asked critical questions to the government, about arms sales, or about the most difficult questions, and also the questions that are coming in the other work that a parliament does, which is like investigative committees. It's always the Linke ones that are kind of making trouble. And I feel like if they weren't there, especially in the parliament, if they weren't there, I think it's very true. I totally agree with you that like there's more to politics than just what happens in a parliament. But there is a limit to what you can do outside of Parliament. Like inside of Parliament, you have a certain amount of power, and you can ask questions directly to the government that you can't ask from outside. And I feel like there has to be a kind of socialist voice of whatever it means, but there has to be some kind of socialist voice in a Parliament. And whether it's in opposition or in the government, but I think it's like really important that that it exists, so that people feel like they're represented, or people, that alternative view exists at the top of the democracy.
Yeah, I would really like a socialist opposition inside the Berlin Parliament and inside the National Parliament. And sometimes Die Linke plays that role. Like sometimes they do play a good role, and you can see like this is what a socialist opposition party would do. But I think more times they're either a party of government defending neoliberal policies that were going to happen one way or another, with them or without them. And even when they're not in government, they're always constantly ready to be in government. Their only strategy is being part of government. And I think Die Linke, they have their party foundation named after Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg spent her entire life arguing against what she called government socialism. She argued the very first time that a socialist joined a government, I think that was in 1898, she was already writing articles about how this was doomed to decapitate and disarm the proletariat. And at the very end of her life as well, she was opposing this idea of the idea that socialists could affect positive changes by entering a government. I don't have any quotes in front of me. She said something like, the natural place of a socialist party is in the opposition, and we're only going to enter into government on top of the ruins of bourgeois society. And I think that's what the kind of socialist party we need. I think there are people in Die Linke who defend a perspective like that. Where we live in Neukölln, we have a Die Linke branch, which is definitely a lot better. One of our local members of the Berlin Parliament, Ferhat Kocak, he, for example, in the Berlin Parliament voted against his own party when they elected Franziska Giffey as mayor. Franziska Giffey had made it really clear that she was going to sabotage the referendum on expropriating big housing, that she wasn't going to comply with that mandate. And so I think there were even 2 members of Die Linke who voted against Giffey, and hey, that's great. I would definitely support them, like, as individuals. But most of the party voted to put Giffey in office, voted for this farce of sabotaging the referendum, voted for the continuing police violence, deportations, evictions, things like that. And I don't think you can support that as a party. I think that ends up...
But that's the question that Berlin, because we have an election coming up, another election in about 4 weeks' time, and that... and all the CDU and the SPD and the Greens are currently all on about 20% in the polls, so it's very on a knife edge about what the next Berlin government is going to be. And it could very easily be a CDU mayor. We could very easily have a CDU mayor with an SPD, second, like junior member of the coalition. I mean, that is a choice now that Berlin voters have to make, one way or another now. I mean, I don't know. I feel like someone's got to run the city.
I just feel like the policy outcomes are going to be pretty similar.
Okay.
For example,
so you're not going to vote for the Linke? Yeah.
I'm not going to vote for Die Linke. I think, for example, in terms of precarious employment, Berlin has been a vanguard in Germany in taking public sector jobs and outsourcing them to private companies with precarious working conditions. If you look at the way universities and hospitals, the way their services are done, Berlin is really the worst state in Germany in terms of attacking basic workers' rights, way worse than any conservative-run state. And I think the way you're going to change that is by people organizing and protesting, and it really makes it more difficult to organize if you tie yourselves to one of the government parties. If you say, those people on the other side of the negotiating table, those people who are passing the laws to attack our basic rights, those are my comrades, And so I think I'm going to vote, what do you call it? Ungültig werden. I'm going to vote, I'm going to spoil my ballot. I'm gonna, and it's not just rejecting elections in general. I really would like to put oppositional socialists into the parliament. I would like to get as many of them as possible there. It's just Die Linke is presenting very few, if any, on their list. Yeah, really just 1 or 2 who are a strong voice of opposition to the current government, and you can't vote for them individually, unfortunately.
But you've got so many parties to choose from.
There's loads of them.
You must surely one of them is somewhere close to what you think. I mean. You've got, what about the KPD then? The Communist Party?
No, the DKP, I think.
Oh, the DKP.
Right? The KPD? There's both, of course. Yeah, there's a German Communist Party and a Communist Party of Germany.
Right.
What?
Do
we think we might be slightly too splintered on the left?
Is there not one that there's no party that you could imagine voting for?
I could definitely imagine voting for a hypothetical party, and I'm going to a conference this Saturday where people are talking about how to build an alternative to the left of Die Linke, a revolutionary, anti-capitalist, socialist force that would participate in elections. But I don't think anything like that exists at the moment. There are some small left-wing parties, but I think that would be a topic for a different podcast. But I think each of them is kind of problematic in their own way, not really what the left.
Well, there's that one party that has like pictures of Lenin and Marx on the posters. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't seen that one
yet.
Is
it the Marxist-Leninist Party?
Yeah,
Marxist-Leninist Party.
It used to be Marxist-Leninist Revolutionary Party, I think, but they've taken out the revolution bit. They are my neighbours. This is why I know
in
them.
Reiterstrasse, right, the party headquarters, MLTD,
I remember there's a guy, they're always kind of out, and what I like is they are like a little bit of a community space, it seems to be in their little place. Like they quite often have events for refugees and various things. There's always sort of like people in there sort of chatting and stuff, so it's nice. But
I would say about the MLPD, see them at demonstrations and stuff, they're definitely, as we say on the left, they're on the right side of the barricades. They're not generally opposed to social progress, I can work together with them in strikes and different social movements. But funny story about the MLPD, I don't even know why. You can go by and ask them yourself. They are so fanatically opposed to illegalized drugs. They hold up signs, down with the swamp of drugs. They want marijuana to stay prohibited. A situation where, mostly black and brown people are getting...
Boomer energy.
a lot of boomer energy. I guess it is definitely an older party. People who were politicized
There's a nice
around
guy that comes
1968.
along, but I live in the Erdgeschoss, and when I was in home office, he would like come, when they're sort of not canvassing on the street, but kind of like, oh, you're interested in this. And I had all my windows open on the ground floor, and he would just like come and start a conversation with me. And eventually I was like, mate, I'm working. This is my workplace. Like, you can't just like walk in.
And they're a very Stalinist party too. Like they not even like
they're
like Stalin, but they really love Stalin. Yeah, kind of
I
old
got
school
quite
like that.
annoyed with them because they had this sort of from a feminist perspective, whatever that day is, and like the Befreiung von, like when we celebrate Nazis being kicked out of Berlin, and they hold this whole like kind of glorification of the Red Army and stuff, and I'm like, I know that this is all nuanced, but as a woman living in Berlin, I feel like you have to kind of also know your history and kind of what happened there and what was I don't know, it's odd.
Yeah, they're definitely kind of an odd Stalinist party in the way their current party chairman is the stepdaughter of the old party chairman, has kind of a North Korean vibe to it as well.
But they do seem to have like nice little events where people go and talk, and I'm all right with community spaces.
What? They are also the richest party in Germany. They get
I'm sorry.
amount of donations.
What?
Yeah. You can get it's all public information. You can get these reports where they get 15 million euros in donations. I think it's because in 1968, you had this huge social radicalization, tons of young people, and among these young people were also people from bourgeois, from aristocratic backgrounds. The MLPD came out of this new Maoist movement that emerged around 1968 in West Germany, and some of the people participating in that were the scions of old aristocratic houses and stuff like that. And I think, as I understand it, those people are dying now, and they're all putting the MLPD into their wills, and so the MLPD gets there's like years where the MLPD has more donations than the Conservative Party, than the CDU.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
And that's why. I mean, they don't have a ton of members in Berlin, but they do have a whole building in Neukölln.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. So I mean, let me put it this way: I don't think
a better place than Reuters.
Excuse me.
Well, there's a little office there.
How dare you?
Sorry.
I don't even know if it's just them, because it's also like an international space. I don't know what's really going on. It's just
Okay.
It's a lot of. It's what I sort of think is that very kind of like old school. They're the kind of, I would say, kind of like left equivalent of like real sort of second wave feminists who are all kind of like quite problematic now in some ways. That's what it kind of reminds me of. It's all of this kind of like someone of a particular generation talking to you in this very earnest language, and I'm just like, it's odd. Anyway, so we're voting for no one?
To sum up, you would advise Neve, our listener, not to vote for anyone.
I'm going to spoil my ballot, yes, and I think your listener should also spoil your ballot. But I mean, it's not just about spoiling your ballot, it's about speaking out in favor of a revolutionary, of a socialist alternative for Berlin.
Okay, and get politically active in other ways that are not necessarily...
We're going to have to form another one of that. Can we not... Fine.
I think different revolutionary socialists, then there are a lot of different groups, and they do fight a lot.
There's there's only so many people on the left. We could only vote for so many.
I think there are ways to get all these different groups, not to overcome all their differences all at once, but to get together in kind of a limited front that says, we want, we agree on these 5 points or 10 points or whatever it is, and, we want you to vote for us on that basis. Even though we might not agree on everything, that's what I'd like to have. That's what I hope the left can create, that, and that's what I'm spoiling my ballot in favor of. I'm saying nothing on this ballot really convinces me that it deserves my support, but I would like some kind of communist front or a socialist front that it tries to organize a fundamental opposition to the system we got right now. Not just tries to prevent the worst or like tries to make things a little bit less bad, but aims for a different kind of society.
Okay, well, that's a lovely note to end on.
That's a lovely note to end on.
Oh, can I add one thing? Because I've listened to this podcast a few times, and I had really underestimated. I had drank alcopops before, and this is a lot of alcohol they're forcing.
An alcopop is not the same as a mega can.
Not at all. No, this mega can is just a lot of booze they're forcing their... Anyone you've heard on this podcast has been way more drunk than you realize. I'm just discovering this myself as a listener.
Well, Well, it was an absolute delight to have you on here, Nathaniel. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, it was great.
I hope you enjoyed your mega can.
We have to mention we've got a new patron.
Yay!
Okay, so...
Thanks. Who is it?
Right. So the thing is, when you sign up to Patreon, you can put your own username in there. You don't have to put in. So he's put in. I know it's a he because I think I know who it is. He's put in Auntie Werner, Wing Chun, and Bill Hook Arts.
Nice.
So
thank you very much for your patronage.
Yes, and if you'd like to contribute a little bit of money and pay for one of these cans,
yes.
Go to patreon.com/ what are we called? Megan's Mega Can.
That's our name. Yes, thank you, Konrad. You could even suggest that you can ask a question that we will take, 4 months to answer. And then you could also suggest what kind of Mega Cans you'd like us to drink. If you want to hear some tasting notes from other Mega Cans. There's still that one involving milk, which I've seen, and I don't know what mood I'm going to have to be in.
Well, it's funny you should say that because we actually got a message from another listener called Jan. Well, I'll tell you about that at a different time.
Oh, I look forward to that. Anyway,
okay.
Take care of yourselves, everyone. Nathaniel has a hand raised. Go for it.
I'd just like to encourage people to check out my book, Revolutionary Berlin.
Oh, please, yes.
You should be able to get it at almost any bookstore in Berlin. And I also do walking tours all the time. You can find those on Facebook or Instagram or my website. That's always just under Revolutionary Berlin is the name. I got a brand new tour about Red Wedding, about the reddest district in all of Berlin. Historically. Yeah, and so you can find that all on social media or the internet.
Yeah, it's a great book and it's published by Pluto Press.
Check it out, everyone.
Check it out. Revolutionary Berlin.
Oh, I'm going to have a coughing fit.
Thanks very much. Happy New Year, everyone. Well,
Happy New Year.
Megan recovers.
I'm so sorry. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Bye.